Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to show you 6 quick shortcut and tips for the HX Stomp and the Helix. These are going to just be really quick tips that you might not know about, and this should apply to the Helix or the HX Stomp. I'm just demoing this on the HX Stomp because it's a little bit easier to see. Time codes are on the screen right now in case if you know some of these, so you can scroll around or skip the ones that you already know. However, I just suggest watching the whole thing just in case if you've missed something, you might learn something new. Before we get started, I post videos like this all the time, stuff on Helix, HX Stomp, wireless, MIDI gear, gear reviews, stuff like that. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this in the future, don't forget to subscribe and don't forget to ring the bell. All right, let's get started. So the first one I mentioned in another video, but a lot of people still don't know about it. This first little button right here, this little dot at the very beginning, there's actually a noise gate hidden in there. So all you have to do is just go over, turn it on, and it's ready to go. You can change the threshold if you want. I had this one set a little bit lower. Usually the default settings work fine. I almost always have that on. All right, and then the next tip, actually I just showed you. So I set this one to -60 for the input threshold. If I want to set that back to the factory settings, all I have to do is just push the button. And that parameter is now back to the normal default settings. So I can set this to whatever I want, mess around with it. If I'm like, oh, I don't like that, I want to set it back, just push the button and it goes right back. This works for anything. So say on the archetype, I want to set the bass back. I didn't change that much. Set the mids back and set the treble back. Now everything's set back to where it was with the default. Okay, something else, how to save favorites. Everyone has their favorite blocks and stuff like that. The way that you do this is actually really easy. So say I really like the transistor tape delay. Hit action, scroll over, add to favorites. And what you can do is you can either replace the favorite, because I already have this one saved as a favorite, or you can add a new favorite. So I'm going to add a new favorite, and there's 2 different settings for the transistor tape now. So if you want to change the name of it, you can hit action, you can clear it, you can reorder it however you want it, and you can rename it as well. So you can call it transistor tape 2 or something like that, so I know what this one means, or just a semicolon for the sake of the video. And then again, if I wanted to clear it, now I don't have it anymore. Make sense? So the way that you would set that up, let me just clear this out really quick so I have more DSP. So now if you want to recall that favorite, push the button. In here, instead of scrolling down to the delay and doing all the settings, you just go to favorites and then choose your transistor tape. And now that transistor tape is right there. Nice and simple, and you can do that with any of your blocks. Okay. So I'm going to go to a blank preset here just to show this one so I don't keep running out of DSP because that other one's pretty full. So let's say on a reverb, on the plate reverb I really like, but I never have, the decay at 7 is usually really high. So say every time I load the plate reverb, I usually set it down to about 2. I set the low cut a little bit higher at about 100. The mix is usually up at about 50. The high cut I usually set at about 8 or something like that. Say this is the settings that I want to leave the plate reverb. So every time I load the plate reverb, it loads with this setting. You can actually do that by hitting action, scrolling over to the end, user default. So now it's saved as the user default. So let me clear this block really quick. Next time that I add that plate reverb, see how my settings are exactly where I set them. I set the high cut to 8. The low cut to 100, and the decay to 2. So now every time I load the plate reverb, it's set that way so I don't have to change the settings every single time. If you ever want to undo that, you can hit action, scroll over, and hit factory default, and it'll put it back to the factory default settings. You might notice that it's not there currently. It's a little odd that they do this. So let me clear that block. And now, next time that I put it back, put that plate reverb on, now it's back to the default settings. I don't really know why they decided to do it that way, but they did, and that's the default settings now. So again, you can save your own custom settings every time you load that block. All right, next option is let's go to stomp mode. If I want to assign a foot switch, if I want to assign, say this plate reverb to one of these foot switches, it's pretty easy to do, but let's say I have an external one, like this one. This is one I use all the time. This is the Mission Engineering TT2. I love it. It's so compact, so easy to use. I'll post a link down below if you're interested in purchasing one. It's awesome. I love this little addition. But say I want to assign this to an external foot switch, not necessarily one of these, although this does work with these internal foot switches as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push these 2 buttons. Do I want to do a bypass assign? Do I want to turn it on and off? Or do I want to do do I want to control one of the parameters within the plate reverb? If that doesn't make sense, I did do a video on how to control all the parameters within your HX Stomp and your Helix that go over the bypass assign, controller assign, and command center. So be sure to watch that if you're unfamiliar with this. But I'm going to go to the bypass assign. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll over. There's this learn feature right here. I'm going to push it. And now it's waiting for an input on the HX Stomp. And it's going to say, what button do you want to turn this on or off? So I'm going to push this button right here. And now, watch what happens. It turns it on and off. It figured out, let me go back there to bypass assign. It figured out foot switch 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the way this is configured. And it set that up to turn it on and off. So this is especially valuable if you're using a MIDI foot switch. So you'd plug your MIDI foot switch in with the MIDI jacks here, and you're like, I don't know what this MIDI controller is going to send, but I know when I push the first button, I want it to turn on or off the plate reverb. So you push these two buttons right here, bypass assign, scroll over, push learn, push the button on your MIDI controller, and it will assign, it'll do it right here. I don't have my MIDI controller with me, but it'll say, oh, that's MIDI CC 90. And now every time you push that button, it'll send MIDI CC 90 and it'll turn it on and off. So again, you don't really even have to understand MIDI to still be able to program this with a MIDI pedal. And you can also do this with controller assign. And again, if you're not familiar with this, I did a whole video explaining all of this. But controller assign controls the individual parameters. So say I have a pedal that I want to turn the mix up and down. I can do that again. I can hit learn. Let's just assign it to foot switch 4 just for the sake of this, because that's what I have hooked up. So it is assigned foot switch 4, and I can set the minimum value and the maximum value. So at minimum value, I want it at 20, and maximum value, I want it at 80. So now watch what happens when I push the button. So on the mix, it turns it up to 80 and down to 20, controlling that individual parameter. Again, if that went over your head, watch the video where I did a whole in-depth study of how to control the parameters within your HX Stomp. And the last thing I'm going to show you is in your global settings, or kind of in your global settings, push these two buttons, scroll over, you have a global EQ in here actually, which is really nice. And you can set your EQ for every single patch that you have. Now your lows, mids, and highs, I personally just leave those alone. But in the low cut, you never need anything below 80 hertz. Up to even about 100 would be pushing it a little bit. But, to really leave room for the bass guitar, you never really need anything below that. 85 is probably a good spot to push that. And then a high cut, I have it set to 8 kilohertz because you never really need anything above 8 kilohertz for a live setting because that's what makes it kind of sound fuzzy and almost fake. So I actually have this set so that I never have to really mess with so I never really have to set an EQ like a high and a low cut. I never have to use this one again, and I can just use like a parametric EQ or a 10-band graphic EQ and mess with that. Mess with the individual frequencies in here. But again, pushing these two buttons, scroll over, global EQ, you can change your low cut and your high cut, and that'll definitely help clean up your tone. Because again, you never need anything below 80 to 100-ish, it depends, for guitar. And you never really need anything above 8 kilohertz, in my experience. So I hope that helped you guys out. There's just a couple of quick tips. If you found this video helpful, I would just ask that you would hit the like button. It really does a lot to help push the video out to other people, as well as push my channel out into the YouTube algorithm. So I'd really appreciate it. Even if you didn't subscribe, just hitting the like button would really help. If you do want to see more videos like this in the future, I won't complain if you hit that subscribe button though. So I hope that helped you guys out. Just a quick note, you might notice that this is a different power supply than the normal HX Stomp power supply. I did a video about a really cool device called the Ripcord by MyVolts, which you can actually power your music gear using USB. It's actually really cool. So if you're interested in checking that out, click the link on the screen or click the link to check out my playlist for other Helix and HX Stomp videos. Thank you guys again for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.